The weight of the evening settled on Amelia's shoulders long before she put on the sapphire dress. It was a cold, heavy thing, much like the life she had been living for the past 10 years. The gala, the grandest event of the year for Sterling Corp, was supposed to be a celebration of success. For Amelia, it was just another stage for her public humiliation. Her husband, Marcus, the CEO and supposed architect of this $30 billion empire, had already made his disdain for her clear that morning. "Try not to look so drab, Amelia," he had said, not even looking up from his phone. "Isabella will be there. I want the press to see what real class looks like." He didn't need to say more. The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Isabella, his mistress, was his real partner. Amelia was just a legal obligation, a relic from a past he was eager to erase. She had simply nodded, her throat too tight to form a reply. For a decade she had been his silent supporter, the quiet woman behind the great man. Now she was just the woman in the way. As she fastened the clasp of a simple pearl necklace, the only piece of jewelry her father had left her, her fingers brushed against a small, worn object in her pocket. It was a key, not a modern key, but an old, ornate one made of brass, attached to a faded leather fob. Her father, a man she remembered as a quiet, unassuming accountant, had given it to her on his deathbed. "For when the world shows its true face," he had whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He had passed away hours later, leaving her with the key and a sealed envelope bearing the name of a law firm she had never heard of, Sterling and Croft. She had never understood his words, not truly. But tonight she felt their chilling premonition. The world, in the form of her husband, was about to show its ugliest face. The limousine ride to the gala was a silent, suffocating affair. Marcus scrolled through his phone, a smug smile playing on his lips. He was likely texting Isabella, coordinating their grand entrance. Amelia stared out at the city lights, feeling as distant from them as she was from the man beside her. She had met Marcus when he was nothing more than a junior executive with big dreams and an empty wallet. She had believed in him, supported him with the modest inheritance she thought was all her father had left her. That seed money had started it all. He had been different then. He had been charming, attentive, full of promises about the life they would build together. But as the money grew, so did his ego. The company, Sterling Corp, had exploded, becoming a titan of industry. And with every new acquisition, with every billion added to his net worth, a piece of the man she had married chipped away, replaced by a cold, arrogant stranger. His mother, Eleanor, had encouraged the change. She had always viewed Amelia as beneath them, a simple girl who had gotten lucky. Eleanor worshipped status and wealth, and in her eyes her son was a god. Amelia was merely the inconvenient mortal he had foolishly tethered himself to. The phone calls from Eleanor were a constant barrage of thinly veiled insults, critiques of her clothes, her demeanor, her inability to keep up with Marcus's world. The car pulled up to the red carpet. The blinding flash of cameras erupted like a sudden storm. Marcus stepped out, a master of the stage, waving to the crowd with a practiced smile. He turned back, not to help his wife, but to issue a final cold command. "Stay 10 paces behind me, and for God's sake, smile. Don't embarrass me more than you already do." Amelia followed, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She felt like a ghost, trailing in the wake of her husband's brilliance. The reporters shouted his name, their questions a chaotic symphony of adulation. No one looked at her. No one even knew her name. She was just Mrs. Sterling, a title that felt more like a brand than an identity. Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with silver and flowers. The most powerful people in the city mingled, their laughter echoing in the vast space. Marcus was immediately swarmed, shaking hands, basking in the glow of his success. Amelia was left alone, an island in a sea of glittering sharks. She found her way to the head table, her designated seat next to the empty one reserved for Marcus. Her name was there on a small, elegant place card, Amelia Sterling. For a moment, a foolish flicker of hope sparked within her. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe he would remember the woman who had stood by him from the very beginning. The hope was extinguished in an instant. A hush fell over the room, a collective intake of breath. The grand doors opened again, and Isabella made her entrance. She was stunning in a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, fiery contrast to Amelia's demure blue. She walked with a predator's confidence, her eyes locked on Marcus. Marcus broke away from his circle of admirers, his face lighting up with a genuine warmth Amelia hadn't seen directed at her in years. He met Isabella in the center of the room, taking her hand and kissing it for all the world to see. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. He was not just having an affair, he was announcing it. He was replacing his wife in front of everyone who mattered. Then came the final, devastating blow. He led Isabella by the hand, not to a seat among the guests, but directly toward the head table. He walked right up to Amelia's chair. He didn't speak to her. He didn't even look at her. He simply picked up the place card with her name on it, crumpled it in his fist, and dropped it to the floor. He pulled out the chair and gestured for Isabella to sit. She slid into the seat, Amelia's seat, and gave Amelia a triumphant, cruel smirk. The message was clear. You are replaced. You are nothing. Marcus finally turned to her, his voice a low, contemptuous whisper that cut through the atmosphere like a blade. There's a table in the back, near the kitchens. That's where you belong. Now go before you make a scene. The world swam before Amelia's eyes, the whispers of the crowd, the clicking of cameras, the smug look on Isabella's face. It all blurred into a nightmare. Her breath hitched, her hands trembled. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. This was it, the ultimate humiliation. He had not just broken her heart, he had shattered her dignity on a public stage. She turned, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't look back. She walked away from the head table, past the staring faces and the silent judgment. Her hand went into her pocket, her fingers closing around the cold brass of her father's key. And in that moment of absolute degradation, his words came back to her with perfect, painful clarity. For when the world shows its true face. The world had shown its face. It was ugly, it was cruel, and it was smiling from her seat at the head table. As she pushed through the heavy doors and escaped into the cold night air, something inside her finally broke. But beneath the broken pieces, something else, something hard and unyielding, began to form. The years of quiet suffering were over. The sleeping giant was beginning to stir. Amelia didn't go home. The sprawling, sterile mansion Marcus had bought was his house, not hers. It was a museum of his success, filled with art he didn't understand and furniture she was afraid to touch. She checked into a modest, anonymous hotel across town, the kind of place she wouldn't have been seen in for a decade. The anonymity was a comfort. In the quiet of the small room, she took out the key and the envelope. Her hands were surprisingly steady now. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, desolate calm. She had cried all the tears she had for Marcus years ago in the silent privacy of their lonely marriage. What she felt now was not sadness. It was something else, a feeling she couldn't yet name. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper, a letterhead for Sterling and Croft Private Counsel. The letter was brief, written in her father's neat, precise hand. "My dearest Amelia, if you are reading this, it means the time has come. The man at this firm, Mr. Sterling, was my most trusted friend. He holds the truth of what I built for you. The key is for him. Trust him. He will protect what is yours. Always know your worth, even when others try to make you forget it. With all my love, Dad." Mr. Sterling. The name was a coincidence, a strange echo of the corporate empire that had just disowned her. Her father, Jonathan, had been a simple man, or so she had always believed. He worked long hours as an accountant for a small, obscure firm. He had lived in a modest suburban house and drove a practical car. He had been kind, patient, and brilliant with numbers, but he had never shown any sign of significant wealth or power. Yet he had a private counsellor at a firm with an address in the city's most exclusive financial district. He had left her a mysterious key and a cryptic message. For 10 years she had dismissed it as a sentimental quirk of a dying man. She had been too caught up in her life with Marcus, first in love, then in hope, and finally in a quiet state of endurance. She had never felt the need to investigate. Now everything was different. The life she had known was a lie, a cruel charade that had ended in her utter debasement. She had nothing left to lose. The next morning, fueled by a sleepless night and a thermos of bitter coffee, she took a taxi to the address on the letterhead. The building was old and unassuming, its stone facade a quiet statement of old money and discretion. It stood in stark contrast to the glittering glass and steel tower of Sterling Corp a few blocks away. The lobby was hushed, panelled in dark wood, and smelled of leather and polish. A polite receptionist directed her to the top floor. The office of Mr. Sterling was more like a library than a legal chamber. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in the hearth, even though it was a mild day. Behind a large mahogany desk sat a man who looked to be in his late 70s with kind eyes and a mane of white hair. He rose as she entered, his smile gentle. "Miss Amelia," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I have been waiting for you for a very long time. Your father was a great man. Please, sit." Amelia felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost buckled her knees. No one had called her Miss Amelia since before her marriage. For a decade, she had been Mrs. Sterling, an extension of Marcus. This man saw her, the person she was before all of this. She sat down and, without a word, placed the key on his desk. His eyes softened. "Jonathan's key," he murmured. "He told me you would bring it only when you were truly ready." He took the key and walked over to a large, antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room. He didn't wind it. Instead, he used the key on a hidden lock, disguised as an ornamental detail on its side. With a soft click, a section of the clock's base swung open, revealing not gears and pendulums, but a small steel safe. He spun the dial with practiced ease and opened it. Inside, there was no treasure chest, no stacks of cash or glittering jewels. There was only a single, thick document bound in dark blue leather. Mr. Sterling brought it back to the desk and placed it in front of her. The gold lettering on the cover was simple. The Genesis Trust. "Your father was not an accountant, Amelia," Mr. Sterling began, his voice taking on a more formal, serious tone. That was a cover. In reality, he was one of the most brilliant and reclusive investors of the last century. He was a ghost in the machine of the financial world, a genius at creating wealth while remaining completely invisible. Amelia stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. Her quiet, gentle father, a financial ghost. It seemed impossible. He built an empire, Sterling continued, his gaze unwavering. A vast, sprawling network of companies, properties and assets, all held within a complex structure of anonymous holding companies and shell corporations. He did it for one reason, to protect you. He had seen what great wealth did to families, how it corrupted people. He wanted you to find a partner who loved you for yourself, not for your inheritance. A bitter laugh escaped Amelia's lips. Well, that plan didn't quite work out, did it? Mr. Sterling gave a sad smile. No, I'm afraid it did not. But your father was a cautious man. He prepared for every eventuality. He gestured to the document. This is the Genesis Trust. It is the heart of your father's entire financial universe, and you, Amelia, are its sole, irrevocable beneficiary and owner. He let the words sink in. Amelia's head was spinning. Sole owner of what? I don't understand, she whispered. My father left me a small inheritance, about $200,000. I used it to help Marcus start his first company. A test, Sterling explained. Your father seeded that account to see what your future husband would do with it. The rest, the true fortune, he kept hidden within the trust. Marcus Sterling's first company was acquired 6 months after its founding by an anonymous investment firm. That firm was one of your father's shell corporations. The room started to feel small, the air thick. The implications of what he was saying began to dawn on her, a terrifying, exhilarating wave of understanding. Sterling Corp, Sterling said, his voice dropping slightly. The company your husband believes he built from the ground up. The company that bears his name, a fact that always privately amused your father, given my own name. Sterling Corp is not Marcus's company, Amelia. It never was. He paused, letting the full weight of the revelation land. It is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Genesis Trust. It is, and always has been, yours. Amelia could not speak. The floor seemed to have fallen away from beneath her feet. The $30 billion empire Marcus lorded over, the source of his power, his arrogance, his cruelty. It was all hers. The money he used to lavish gifts on his mistress was her money. The penthouse they shared was her penthouse. The jet they flew in was her jet. Marcus wasn't the king of an empire. He was a glorified manager, an employee. And for the past 10 years, she had been his silent, unknowing employer. The humiliation of the previous night flashed in her mind. Isabella in her chair, the crumpled place card, Marcus's sneering dismissal. The irony was so profound, so staggering, it was almost comical. He had kicked the true queen out of her own castle, believing her to be a peasant. Mr. Sterling watched her, his expression one of deep empathy. Your father set it up this way so that Marcus would never know. The board of directors, the executives, they all report up a chain of command that ultimately answers to the trustee, which, until today, was me. All of Marcus's salary, his bonuses, his expense accounts, they were all approved by a board acting on behalf of the trust, on behalf of you. The cold, desolate calm from the night before returned, but now it was forged into something new. It was resolve. It was a diamond-hard certainty that settled deep in her soul. The patient victim was gone. The sleeping giant was wide awake. She looked up from the leather-bound trust document, her eyes meeting Mr. Sterling's. The tremor in her hands was gone. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, devoid of the hesitation that had plagued her for a decade. He built his throne in my house, she said, the words tasting like justice on her tongue. It's time to take back the furniture. Mr. Sterling's gentle smile widened, but now there was a glint of steel in his eyes. "I have been waiting a long time to hear you say that, Miss Amelia. I have all the necessary documents prepared. With your signature, you will assume your rightful position as chairwoman of the Genesis Trust's Board of Governors. You will have full, absolute, and immediate control over every single asset." He slid a pen and a stack of papers across the polished mahogany. Amelia didn't hesitate. She picked up the pen and signed her name, her true name, on each page. With every stroke, she felt a layer of the old Amelia, the timid, overlooked, long-suffering wife, slough away. In its place stood a woman who now understood her own power. When she was done, she looked at her old ally. "How do we begin?" "We begin," Mr. Sterling said, a hint of relish in his voice, "by making a few phone calls. The plan must be surgical. We will use the very system he worships, corporate governance, financial regulations, the letter of the law, to dismantle his world piece by piece." For the next 2 days they worked from a secure suite within the law firm's offices. It became their war room. Mr. Sterling, the seasoned general, laid out the battlefield, explaining the intricate web of corporations and legal structures her father had built. Amelia, the newly crowned queen, proved to be a quick study. The years of being underestimated had sharpened her mind, made her observant. She absorbed the complex information with a focus that surprised even herself. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. It was designed not just to take everything from Marcus, but to make him an active participant in his own destruction. They would use his arrogance, his overconfidence, his belief in his own impunity as the primary weapons against him. Step 1 was to cut off his resources. Mr. Sterling, acting on Amelia's new authority as chairwoman, made a call to the chief financial officer of the Trust's primary holding company. His instructions were simple and direct. Initiate an immediate forensic audit of all Sterling Corp executive accounts, citing suspected financial malfeasance. Freeze all corporate credit lines and expense accounts for the CEO, Marcus Sterling, pending the outcome of the audit. The second call was to the head of a financial regulatory agency. An anonymous tip was filed detailing extravagant and undocumented corporate spending linked to a non-employee, Isabella Dubois. The tip included flight manifests for the corporate jet and receipts from luxury boutiques in Paris and Milan, all paid for with a Sterling Corp account. While Mr. Sterling set the official gears in motion, Amelia focused on a more personal target, Eleanor. Mr. Sterling's files were impeccably detailed. He revealed that the lavish home Eleanor lived in was not in fact owned by her. Marcus had purchased it for her using a loan from a private mortgage company. That company, of course, was another subsidiary of the Genesis Trust. And Eleanor, at Marcus's urging, had been notoriously late on her payments for years, a fact Marcus had always fixed with a simple phone call. "No more phone calls," Amelia said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Initiate foreclosure proceedings, immediately, by the book." Meanwhile, Marcus and Isabella were living in a state of blissful ignorance. They were celebrating their victory. After the gala, they had flown to a private island in the Caribbean on the company jet, a trip Marcus had brazenly logged as a corporate retreat. Their first inkling that something was wrong came when they tried to check out of their $1,000-a-night villa. The corporate American Express, the one Marcus used for everything, was declined. Marcus was furious. He scoffed, telling the hotel manager it was obviously a mistake, a technical glitch. He tried another corporate card, declined, and another, declined. Humiliation crept up his neck as he was forced to use his personal debit card, a card he rarely touched, to settle the massive bill. The charge nearly wiped out his liquid funds. He spent the entire flight back to the city screaming at his assistant over the phone. "What do you mean? Frozen for an audit? Who authorized an audit? I am the CEO. I authorize things." His assistant, a woman he had bullied for years, sounded strangely calm. "The directive came from the parent holding company, Mr. Sterling. It's above my pay grade. It's above everyone's pay grade here." "What parent company?" Marcus roared. "I am the parent company." The line was silent for a moment. "Apparently not, sir." When they landed, a new horror awaited them. The company-provided town car that was always waiting for him on the tarmac was gone. In its place was a standard yellow taxi. As they approached the terminal, he saw the corporate jet being towed away to a different hangar. A man in a suit intercepted them, handed Marcus a thick envelope and said, "Mr. Sterling, your access to all corporate assets has been suspended pending an investigation. You are to vacate the corporate penthouse within 24 hours. Marcus stood on the tarmac, stunned into silence. Isabella's perfectly made-up face was a mask of panic. "Marcus, what is happening? What does he mean, vacate the penthouse?" "It's nothing," Marcus snapped, his voice strained. "It's a corporate power play. Someone on the board is trying to make a move. I'll crush them. I'll have their jobs by morning." But when he got to the penthouse, his key card flashed red. Access denied. His codes were no longer valid. He had been locked out of his own home. Reality began to crash down on him, a tidal wave of ice-cold water. He was losing control. His phone rang. It was his mother, her voice a hysterical shriek. "Marcus, I've received a letter, an eviction notice. They're foreclosing on my house. You have to fix this. Call your lawyers. Call someone." The cascade was beginning. Each disaster flowed seamlessly into the next. The press, tipped off by the anonymous source, began running stories. Sterling Corp CEO under investigation for embezzlement. Lavish lifestyle of Marcus Sterling and Mistress funded by company coffers. His face, once a symbol of success, was now plastered across financial news sites next to headlines about fraud and corruption. From her hotel suite, Amelia watched it all unfold. She read the articles, saw the panicked photos of Marcus and Isabella being hounded by paparazzi outside the locked doors of the penthouse. She ignored the hundreds of frantic calls and desperate pleading texts that flooded her phone. They started with rage, then confusion, then fear, and finally a pathetic begging for her to help him. He still had no idea she was the cause. He thought she was his only remaining ally, the spurned wife who might, out of some lingering loyalty, come to his rescue. The final piece of the plan was to call an emergency board meeting. An official summons was sent to Marcus. He was legally obligated to attend, not as the chairman, but as the subject of the investigation. It would be his final performance on the corporate stage. The day of the board meeting was grey and overcast, the sky mirroring the storm that had broken over Marcus Sterling's life. He arrived at the Sterling Corp Tower looking haggard. The bespoke suit hung on him differently, his usual arrogant swagger replaced by a tense, hunted look. He stormed into the boardroom on the top floor, the room that had been the seat of his power for a decade. The board members were already seated around the long, polished table. These were men who had once laughed at his jokes and scrambled to do his bidding. Today they looked at him with cold, impassive expressions. They did not stand when he entered. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus began, his voice attempting a roar, but coming out as a strange shout. "This ridiculous audit, this media circus, who is behind this?" No one answered. The silence was his answer. It told him that his power here was gone. He was no longer one of them. He was an outsider, a problem to be dealt with. Just as he was about to launch into another tirade, the main doors to the boardroom swung open silently. Amelia walked in. She was not the woman he had dismissed at the gala. The drab, invisible wife was gone. In her place was a woman radiating a calm, unshakable authority. She wore a tailored charcoal grey suit that was both elegant and severe. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, professional style. Her face was serene, but her eyes held a glint of Arctic cold. She didn't look at Marcus. She walked directly to the head of the table, to the large leather chair that had always been his. She sat down, placing a simple leather portfolio in front of her. Mr. Sterling entered behind her, taking a position standing at her side. The entire room was frozen in a state of stunned disbelief. Marcus stared at her, his mouth agape. He looked from her to the board members, his confusion turning to sputtering rage. "Amelia, what are you doing here? This is a private meeting. Get out! Security!" he yelled, but his voice cracked. No one moved. Amelia finally lifted her eyes and met his. She let the silence stretch, enjoying the sight of his blustering confusion. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room, clear and sharp as splintered ice. "You spent 10 years treating me like I was nothing," she began, her tone even and measured. "A piece of furniture you could discard when it no longer suited the decor. You humiliated me, you belittled me, and you took everything I gave you and called it your own." Her gaze flickered for a moment to the chair she now occupied. "At the gala you sat your mistress in my chair. A symbolic gesture, you thought, a final insult to the worthless wife you were about to cast aside." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "But what you didn't know, Marcus, is that it wasn't just my chair. It was my table, in my boardroom, in my building, owned by my company." A collective gasp went through the room. Marcus's face went from red to a sickly, pale white. He looked as if he had been physically struck.
"You were never a king, Marcus," Amelia continued, her voice relentless. "You were a manager, an employee running a small division of a much larger enterprise, an enterprise you knew nothing about, an enterprise I own. Every penny you ever made, every bonus you were ever paid, every asset you so proudly flaunted, it all flowed from me." Just then, the doors burst open again. Isabella rushed in, her face a mess of frantic energy. "Marcus, the reporters are everywhere. They're saying we're bankrupt. You have to do something." She stopped short, seeing Amelia at the head of the table. Her eyes widened in confusion. Amelia didn't even grant Isabella a glance. Her focus was entirely on the man whose world was collapsing before her eyes. "You're lying," Marcus whispered, the words trembling. "You're nobody, a quiet little mouse. My mother was right. You're nothing but a—" "Please," Mr. Sterling interrupted, his voice cutting through Marcus's pathetic denial. He stepped forward and placed the blue leather-bound document, the Genesis Trust, on the table. "I believe this will clarify the ownership structure for you, Mr. Sterling. It is the founding document of the trust that owns 98% of the shares in this corporation's parent company. And this," he added, placing another document beside it, "is the legally executed charter naming Miss Amelia Sterling as the sole beneficiary and new chairwoman of the Board of Governors. It is all quite clear." The truth, undeniable and absolute, finally broke through Marcus's wall of arrogance. He sank into a nearby chair, his body deflating as if all the bones had been removed. He stared at Amelia, but he wasn't seeing the powerful woman in front of him. He was seeing the ghost of the quiet girl he had married, the girl he had used and discarded, and he finally understood the colossal scale of his miscalculation. Isabella,
seeing the look of utter defeat on his face and the legal documents on the table, finally understood. Her loyalty, which had always been transactional, evaporated in an instant. Her face twisted in fury. "You told me you owned all of this? You useless, pathetic man! You have nothing!" she shrieked at Marcus, before turning her venom on Amelia. "You think you've won? You'll still be the same boring, pathetic little—" "Security," Amelia said calmly, cutting her off without raising her voice. Two large guards who had been waiting outside entered the room. "Please escort Miss Dubois from the premises. She is trespassing." As Isabella was dragged away, screaming insults and threats, Amelia turned her attention back to Marcus. His breakdown was complete. He was muttering to himself, shaking his head in disbelief, a broken man in a billion-dollar suit. "This meeting is to inform the board of a change in leadership," Amelia announced to the room, "and to address the matter of the former CEO. She looked directly at Marcus, her face a mask of cold judgment. "You will be prosecuted for embezzlement for the millions in company funds you illegally funneled to Miss Dubois. The forensic audit has uncovered enough evidence to ensure a conviction. Your mother's home, which was leveraged against the trust, is in foreclosure. She will be evicted by the end of the week. All your personal assets, which were purchased with funds now proven to be misappropriated, will be seized." She stood up, her presence filling the room. "You will be left with exactly what you started with 10 years ago. Nothing, in fact, less than nothing, once the legal fees and restitution are settled." She gathered her portfolio and turned to leave. She paused at the door, looking back one last time at the shattered remnant of the man who had caused her so much pain. "My father told me to always know my worth," she said, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. "You spent a decade trying to make me forget it. Today, I'm simply reminding you of yours." Then she walked out of the boardroom and didn't look back, leaving the ruins of Marcus Sterling's life behind her. The aftermath was swift and total. Marcus Sterling, the titan of industry, was reduced to a public disgrace. The trial was a media sensation, with every sordid detail of his affair and his financial crimes laid bare. He was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. He lost everything. Isabella disappeared from the public eye, last seen trying to sell her story to a tabloid magazine. Burdened by debt and social ruin, she faded into the obscurity from which she came. Eleanor, stripped of her home and her son's tainted wealth, was forced to move into a small, government-subsidized apartment, a cruel echo of the charity case she had always accused Amelia of being. The socialites who had once flocked to her now crossed the street to avoid her. Amelia, however, did not revel in her victory. She did not move into the penthouse or start wearing designer clothes. The immense wealth and power that were now hers were not a prize to be flaunted, but a responsibility to be honored. She dissolved the more aggressive and predatory arms of the corporate empire, redirecting the capital into ethical and sustainable ventures. Her primary focus became the Genesis Trust's new philanthropic arm, the Jonathan Foundation, named after her father. She poured billions into building schools in underserved communities, funding medical research, and creating affordable housing projects. She became known not as a corporate raider, but as a quiet, effective philanthropist who used her immense resources to heal the world, not conquer it. She worked not from the towering Sterling Corp skyscraper, but from a modest office in one of the community centers she had funded. She rarely gave interviews, preferring to let the work speak for itself. She had spent a decade being invisible, and she found she still preferred the quiet power of working behind the scenes. One afternoon, she was reviewing blueprints for a new homeless shelter, standing on the dusty construction site. The head architect, A kind-faced man named Liam, with warm eyes and a gentle smile, was explaining the design to her. He didn't know the full story of who she was. He just knew her as the head of the foundation, a woman who was deeply committed to the project. "You have a real gift for this," he said, gesturing to a change she had suggested to make the common areas feel more welcoming. "You see the details, you see the people." Amelia smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. It was a feeling she was getting used to again. "My father always said the strongest structures are built on a solid, honest foundation," she replied. Liam nodded, his gaze respectful and admiring. "He sounds like a wise man." "He was," Amelia said, looking out at the city skyline. She was no longer a ghost in the shadow of a glass tower. She was here, on the ground, building something real, something that would last. She had reclaimed her name, her life, and her father's true legacy. True power, she had learned, was not in what you displayed for the world to see, but in the quiet, steady strength of your own character. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars or stock prices, but in integrity and the positive impact you had on the lives of others. Marcus had built an empire of ego on a foundation of lies, and it had crumbled to dust. Amelia was building a legacy of kindness on the bedrock of truth, and it was a structure that would stand forever.